A 32-year-old man in Connecticut weighed only 68 pounds when police found him allegedly held captive by his stepmother for over 20 years, leaving investigators stunned by conditions they described as worse than any jail cell. But what authorities discovered next would expose the horrifying truth about how a woman who appeared to be the perfect caregiver had slowly transformed into something unthinkable, destroying a life right under everyone's noses. In the quiet neighborhoods of Connecticut, blended families are as common as the changing autumn leaves. When Kimberly Sullivan became a stepmother, neighbors and acquaintances saw nothing unusual about the arrangement. She appeared devoted, responsible, and caring toward her stepson. To those looking from the outside, Sullivan seemed like countless other women navigating the complexities of raising children who were not biologically her own. The boy, who would later identify himself only as S to protect his privacy, had already experienced the typical challenges that come with family restructuring. Like many children in similar situations, he found himself adjusting to new household rules, different expectations, and the delicate balance of loyalty between biological parents and step-parents. What appeared to be normal growing pains would eventually become something far more dangerous. Sullivan worked within the Connecticut community and maintained relationships that painted her as a responsible adult. She understood how to present herself in social situations, knew what to say during brief encounters with neighbors, and possessed the ability to deflect questions about her stepson with explanations that seemed reasonable. Her public persona was carefully crafted, and for years it worked perfectly. The family dynamics appeared stable from external perspectives. Sullivan had taken on the maternal role, and her stepson lived under her care and supervision. To casual observers, this was simply another American family, making the best of their circumstances. There were no obvious red flags that would cause concern among neighbors, teachers, or community members who occasionally interacted with them. During the early years, the household functioned with what seemed like typical routines. The boy attended school, participated in some activities, and maintained connections with the outside world. Sullivan appeared attentive to his needs and presented herself as someone who took her responsibilities seriously. She spoke about him in ways that suggested care and investment in his well-being. However, beneath this carefully maintained facade, subtle changes were beginning to take root. What started as seemingly reasonable household rules would gradually evolve into something more controlling. The boundaries between appropriate parental authority and excessive control would slowly blur, though these changes happened so gradually that they went unnoticed by anyone outside the home. The community around them continued their daily lives, unaware that within one household, a situation was developing that would eventually shock law enforcement officers who had seen countless difficult cases throughout their careers. Sullivan had successfully created an environment where her true nature remained hidden, allowing her to maintain complete control over the narrative that others believed about their family situation. The transformation from caring stepmother to controller did not happen overnight. Like many cases of long-term abuse, the changes occurred gradually, making them difficult to detect and even harder to escape. What appeared to be reasonable parental concern slowly morphed into excessive monitoring and restriction. Initially, Sullivan implemented what seemed like protective measures for her stepson. She expressed concerns about his safety, his choices, and his interactions with others. To anyone listening, these concerns sounded like those of a responsible parent who wanted to keep her child safe from harmful influences. She spoke about wanting to provide structure and guidance during what she described as difficult developmental years. The restrictions began small and seemed logical. Sullivan would limit certain activities, claiming they were inappropriate or potentially dangerous. She monitored his friendships more closely, suggesting that some companions were not good influences. She controlled his schedule more tightly, explaining that routine and structure were essential for his development and success. As these limitations increased, the boy found himself with fewer opportunities to maintain relationships outside the home. His contact with friends became more sporadic, and eventually, many of these connections faded entirely. Sullivan always had explanations for why these relationships were problematic, or why they needed to be discontinued for his own good. The educational situation also began to change. Sullivan started expressing dissatisfaction with traditional schooling options, claiming that the environment was not suitable for her stepson's specific needs. She presented herself as someone who understood his requirements better than teachers or school administrators possibly could. This allowed her to justify removing him from regular educational settings. Medical appointments and healthcare decisions fell increasingly under Sullivan's complete control. She positioned herself as the person who best understood his health needs and could make appropriate decisions about treatment and care. This effectively eliminated another potential point of contact where outside professionals might notice concerning changes in his condition or circumstances. Social workers, teachers, and other community members who might have been in positions to observe and report concerning behaviors found themselves with limited access to the boy. Sullivan had systematically reduced these contacts while maintaining explanations that sounded reasonable to anyone who did not see the complete pattern developing over time. The physical isolation was accompanied by psychological manipulation that made the victim question his own perceptions and needs. Sullivan created an environment where her stepson became dependent on her for basic necessities, while simultaneously convincing him that this level of control was normal and necessary for his well-being. Friends and extended family members found their access increasingly limited. Sullivan would explain that visits were inconvenient, that the boy was going through a difficult phase, or that outside influences were disruptive to his progress. These explanations were delivered with such conviction and apparent concern that most people accepted them without question. The gradual nature of these changes meant that there was no single moment when the situation suddenly became obviously wrong. Each restriction seemed like a small step from the previous one, making it difficult for anyone, including the victim, to recognize the developing pattern of control and abuse. As the years progressed, what had begun as seemingly protective restrictions evolved into a comprehensive system of captivity. Sullivan had successfully isolated her stepson from the outside world while maintaining the appearance of a caring guardian to anyone who might inquire about their family situation. The physical restrictions became increasingly severe. The young man found himself confined to specific areas of the home, with his movements monitored and controlled at all times. Sullivan implemented rules that effectively eliminated his ability to leave the house independently or to communicate with anyone outside their immediate household. Food became a tool of control. Sullivan determined when, what, and how much her stepson could eat. This systematic restriction of nutrition had devastating effects on his physical development and health. Over time, his weight dropped to dangerous levels, but because he was isolated from medical professionals and others who might recognize the signs of malnutrition, this alarming change went unnoticed by anyone in a position to help. Personal hygiene and basic human dignity were compromised as part of the control system. Sullivan created conditions that prevented her stepson from maintaining normal cleanliness or appearance. These restrictions served multiple purposes. They made it less likely that he would be able to present himself appropriately if he somehow managed to escape, and they reinforced his sense of helplessness and dependence. The psychological manipulation became as devastating as the physical restrictions. Sullivan created an environment where her stepson questioned his own perceptions, needs, and rights. She convinced him that the conditions he was experiencing were normal, necessary, or deserved based on his behavior or character flaws. Communication with the outside world was completely eliminated. Sullivan monitored and controlled all potential points of contact, ensuring that her stepson had no way to reach out for help or to maintain relationships that might provide emotional support or assistance. She had effectively created a prison within their home, while maintaining the appearance of a normal household to neighbors and community members. The living conditions deteriorated to levels that would later shock experienced law enforcement officers. Sullivan created an environment that denied basic human needs while justifying these conditions through a complex system of rules and punishments that made no sense to anyone outside the situation but seemed inescapable to the victim. Medical neglect became another component of the abuse. Sullivan prevented her stepson from receiving appropriate health care, claiming to understand his needs better than medical professionals. This isolation from healthcare providers eliminated another potential avenue through which the abuse might have been discovered and stopped. The financial aspect of the control was equally comprehensive. Sullivan ensured that her stepson had no access to money, identification documents, or other resources that might enable him to seek help or escape the situation. She controlled every aspect of his material existence while presenting herself to others as someone who was providing care and support. Years passed with this system of control and abuse becoming more entrenched and comprehensive. Sullivan had created a situation where her stepson was completely dependent on her for survival, while simultaneously being denied basic human rights and dignity. The longer this continued, the more difficult it became for the victim to imagine any alternative or to believe that escape was possible. After more than 20 years of captivity, the situation finally came to the attention of law enforcement through circumstances that Sullivan could not control or manipulate. The exact details of how authorities became aware of the situation demonstrate the comprehensive nature of the isolation and control that had been maintained for so long. When Connecticut police officers first encountered the 32-year-old man, they were immediately struck by his physical condition. Weighing only 68 pounds, he presented a shocking picture of long-term neglect and abuse. Officers who had responded to countless difficult situations throughout their careers found themselves confronted with conditions they described as worse than those in jail cells. The investigation that followed revealed the extent of Sullivan's systematic abuse and control. Law enforcement officials discovered evidence of the prolonged captivity and the methods that had been used to maintain such complete control over another human being for such an extended period. The physical evidence supported what the victim was finally able to tell them about his experiences. Kimberly Sullivan, 56 years old at the time of her arrest, was taken into custody and charged with multiple offenses related to the alleged captivity and abuse of her stepson. The charges reflected the serious nature of the crimes that investigators believed had been committed over the course of more than 2 decades. Medical professionals who examined the victim after his rescue were appalled by his condition. The effects of long-term malnutrition, medical neglect, and psychological abuse were evident in every aspect of his physical and mental health. The medical evaluation provided crucial evidence of the systematic abuse that had occurred over such an extended period. The community reaction was one of shock and disbelief. Neighbors and acquaintances struggled to reconcile the image of Sullivan as a responsible caregiver with the horrific reality that had been hidden within their neighborhood. Many expressed regret that they had not recognized signs that might have led to earlier intervention. The investigation expanded as authorities worked to understand how such extensive abuse could continue undetected for so many years. They examined the methods Sullivan had used to maintain her facade, while simultaneously holding her stepson captive. The sophistication of the deception and control system became clear as more details emerged. Child Protective Services and other agencies became involved in understanding how their systems had failed to detect or prevent such long-term abuse. The case raised serious questions about the effectiveness of oversight mechanisms designed to protect vulnerable individuals from family abuse. The legal proceedings began as prosecutors prepared to present evidence of the alleged crimes. The complexity of the case, involving decades of abuse and control, required extensive preparation and coordination among multiple agencies and experts. Media attention brought the case to national attention, highlighting issues of family abuse, long-term captivity, and the ways that abusers can maintain control while appearing normal to the outside world. The case became an example of how abuse can be hidden in plain sight when abusers are skilled at manipulation and deception. The process of recovery for someone who had been held captive for more than 20 years presented unprecedented challenges for medical professionals, mental health experts, and social services agencies. The victim faced the enormous task of rebuilding his life while dealing with the physical and psychological effects of long-term abuse. Medical treatment became the immediate priority. The severe malnutrition, muscle atrophy, and other physical effects of prolonged captivity required extensive intervention. Healthcare providers worked to address not only the obvious physical damage, but also the long-term health consequences that would continue to affect him for years to come. Psychological recovery proved equally complex. The victim had to rebuild his understanding of normal human relationships, appropriate boundaries, and his own worth and capabilities. Mental health professionals specializing in trauma and abuse worked to help him process the experiences and develop coping mechanisms for moving forward. Social reintegration presented enormous challenges. After decades of isolation, the victim had to learn to navigate a world that had changed dramatically during his captivity. Technology, social norms, and basic aspects of daily life required careful guidance and support as he worked to develop independent living skills. The courage required for the victim to speak publicly about his experiences demonstrated remarkable strength and resilience. His decision to identify himself as S while sharing his ordeal reflected both his desire to protect his privacy and his determination to raise awareness about hidden abuse. His public statements provided insight into the psychological effects of long-term captivity and control. Legal proceedings against Sullivan continued as prosecutors worked to hold her accountable for the alleged crimes. The complexity of the case, involving decades of systematic abuse, required extensive documentation and expert testimony to fully present the scope of the allegations. The case prompted discussions about how to better detect and prevent long-term family abuse. Social services agencies, law enforcement, and community organizations examined their procedures and training to identify ways to improve their ability to recognize and respond to hidden abuse situations. Community members struggled with guilt, and regret about not recognizing signs that might have led to earlier intervention. The case highlighted how skilled abusers can maintain facades that prevent detection while committing serious crimes against vulnerable family members. Support services for the victim included not only medical and psychological care, but also practical assistance with basic life skills, education, and employment preparation. The comprehensive nature of his recovery needs required coordination among multiple agencies and service providers. The long-term effects of such extensive abuse continued to present challenges as the victim worked toward independence. Recovery specialists emphasize that healing from such trauma is a long-term process that requires ongoing support and understanding from the community. The case of Kimberly Sullivan and her stepson represents one of the most extreme examples of hidden family abuse, but it also provides crucial lessons about recognizing and preventing similar situations. The sophisticated methods used to maintain control while appearing normal to the outside world demonstrate how abuse can continue undetected, even in communities where people believe they are vigilant about protecting vulnerable individuals. Warning signs that the community missed included the gradual isolation of the victim from friends, family, and social institutions. The systematic elimination of outside contacts should have raised concerns, but Sullivan's explanations seemed reasonable to people who did not see the complete pattern. This highlights the importance of maintaining connections with vulnerable family members and questioning explanations that consistently result in increased isolation. The medical neglect aspect of this case demonstrates why healthcare providers, teachers, and other professionals need training to recognize signs of abuse and neglect. Regular medical checkups, educational assessments, and social services contacts provide opportunities to identify problems before they become life-threatening situations. Community members can play crucial roles in preventing and detecting abuse by maintaining relationships with neighbors and being alert to concerning changes in family situations. The gradual nature of many abuse situations means that people who have regular contact are most likely to notice subtle changes that indicate developing problems. Professional training for social workers, teachers, healthcare providers, and law enforcement officers needs to include information about the sophisticated methods that abusers use to maintain control while avoiding detection. Understanding the psychology of long-term abuse can help professionals recognize situations that require intervention. Support services for abuse survivors must be comprehensive and long-term. The recovery process for someone who has experienced decades of abuse requires specialized care, extensive resources, and ongoing support that addresses physical, psychological, and social needs. The courage demonstrated by this survivor in speaking publicly about his experiences provides hope and inspiration for others who may be trapped in abusive situations. His decision to share his ordeal, even while protecting his privacy, helps raise awareness and may encourage other victims to seek help. Prevention efforts must focus on education about healthy relationships, appropriate boundaries, and the warning signs of abuse. Community education programs can help people recognize concerning situations and understand how to respond appropriately when they suspect abuse is occurring. Legal systems must be prepared to handle complex cases involving long-term abuse and to hold perpetrators accountable for systematic crimes against vulnerable family members. The sophistication of modern abuse requires equally sophisticated legal and social responses. If you found this case as shocking as we did, make sure to subscribe to Criminal Mind Cortex for more incredible true crime investigations that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the people around us. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest examinations of the most mind-bending cases from around the world. Because sometimes the most dangerous predators are hiding in plain sight, pretending to be the people we trust most.